Hey everyone, I'm Becca, a second year student nurse at University of Nottingham. Welcome back to my channel, and if you've never seen a video of mine, then welcome. This video is the final in the placement series, so I'm going to be talking about my second year, second placement, which was in orthopaedics. It was my last placement before they all got cancelled because of coronavirus. I was there from February to March of 2020 and I turned 20 on this placement. Quick disclaimer again, I am not going to be naming any of the hospital trusts, any of the hospitals that I worked at, any of the names of the wards or the teams. I'm not going to be naming any of the members of staff either, obviously for confidentiality reasons. However, if you are familiar with the University of Nottingham and where we work, you might be able to guess as to where my placement was. This was my first time in surgery, so it was very exciting, but I was also kind of nervous as well. Even though I had just been on a ward, surgery was completely different to medicine, but I was very excited to see the differences. This placement was amazing. Firstly, my mentor was so knowledgeable. He's worked in orthopaedics for over 30 years, so he was a specialist. He taught me everything there is to know about orthopaedics. I also got to go on so many amazing insight visits. I got to go to pre-op, I got to go to theatre, and obviously I worked in post-op. So I got to see the entire patient journey. In theatre, I got to see a knee replacement, which was so brutal, but also really amazing. I got to see bones, like, with my eyes. It was so weird, because obviously we don't get to see the bones, because there's muscles and fat and tissue and skin over the bones. But I got to see a bone that was attached to somebody still. Absolutely brutal, but I loved it. And I also got to help a doctor plaster up somebody's leg. I was the plaster nurse, he said, which was absolutely crazy. I'd never done it before, but he was so nice and he let me do it with him. So that was amazing. I loved it. I did my first ever night shift on this placement. I was so terrified to do them before, and on my last placement I actually wasn't even really asked if I wanted to do any, but on this one I was asked if I did because my mentor was working some and I got to work my first ever night shift. I did four night shifts on this placement, and I've fallen in love with nights. I think I'm not really a ward-based person, so if I was to be ward-based I think I would have to work night shifts. I don't mind the night shift at all. I'm a night person, so working from 7 at night till 7 in the morning really didn't bother me at all, and I really enjoyed them actually. On this placement and like in this surgery team, so on this ward and some of the other wards, there were amazing learning opportunities for student nurses and student doctors for us to all come together. One of the registrars actually put a presentation for us together about neck and femur fractures, so it made me actually know what I was talking about when I was speaking to patients. So I knew how to treat people from the surgery that they had, but I didn't know why they needed the surgery or how the surgery worked on the most part, apart from the ones that I'd seen and some that I'd heard about. So it was amazing to be able to find out from the registrar actually why they needed it and why they do the different surgeries as well. And they did this quite a lot. They pulled us into the education room quite a lot and taught us loads of different things, which I loved. They were all surgery based though, unlike on my last placement where specialist nurses came from different specialities to teach us some stuff. This ward, hands down, had the best nursing team I've ever worked with, and some of the doctors were really good as well. I was on one of my night shifts and one of the doctors walked into the room and said, "Hey Becca, are you alright?" I didn't know they knew my name for starters, and then they actually sat down and started asking me about my degree and we spoke about the differences between medicine and nursing degrees, which was crazy. I've never had like a doctor just spark up a conversation like that with me before, but they had hands down the best nursing team, which included my peer mentor from my first year. So I absolutely loved working with this nursing team. I also got to work with training nursing associates and registered nursing associates during my time at this ward as well, which I really loved because I got to learn about their role. We didn't really know an awful lot about this role. We just found out that the NMC were introducing this new role, but through working with them and working alongside them, I got to learn a lot about what they do. Now on to the not so great part of this placement. Sometimes it could be quite quiet, especially on my first day. That's not their fault because they had just previously been a winter ward and my first day on the ward was actually their first day back being orthopaedics. So they only had 3 patients when I arrived, which had been sent from one of the other hospitals. So we were just waiting around a lot of the day, waiting for the surgeries to be over and patients to be sent up to us. And it was kind of like that most Monday mornings, because they do try to discharge a lot of the patients during the weekend to be able to make space for people having the surgeries during the week. So a Monday morning shift, there was a lot of waiting around. And sometimes there were moments in the afternoon on like a regular shift where you didn't really have anything to do. I mean, it meant that you could sit down and do your paperwork, which was great, because obviously on some placements that I've had before, especially stroke rehab, you were basically writing your notes where you were walking out the door, because a lot of these patients, well, then they're not sick, they've just had a surgery, so they can do pretty much a lot of the stuff by themselves, especially when you work with the men, and this ward was mostly men. This next thing can be seen kind of as a negative, but also not. We had a few prisoner patients, which I didn't really mind because it doesn't bother me, but I know some people have been bothered with that. They've had to work with prisoners before. The ward never put me in a position where I was going to be unsafe. There was one prisoner which I obviously can't tell you what they were in there for, but it meant that I wasn't allowed to go in there by myself, even though the prisoners do have 2 guards with them at all times. They always made sure that I went in there with somebody, and they never made me go in there on my own. Not that I was really bothered about it anyway. Being a prisoner or not being a prisoner doesn't affect me. You're still a patient to me at the end of the day, so it didn't really bother me, but some people could see that as a negative. The final negative thing about this placement is I was on there when this whole corona business started. So there was a lot of gossip going on and a lot of stress in the hospital, especially because this ward had just come off being a winter ward. They were terrified they were going to go back. And unfortunately, the week after I left, they did turn into a suspected COVID ward, because obviously they have stopped all non-essential surgeries, so they've stopped all emergencies, so that's all elective, and these guys did do the elective surgeries. So unfortunately they are no longer orthopaedics. They were orthopaedics for about 7 weeks, and then now they're back to doing what they were doing at Christmas. Also, when I was there, my last week there was when the hospital started kind of changing their visiting times, so that made patients very anxious and also their relatives very anxious. So there was a lot of negativity going around in my last week in the hospital just because of corona, and a lot of gossip going around the hospital as well. But overall, I would give this placement an 8 or 9 out of 10. It was definitely one of my favourites. It's definitely my favourite team that I've ever worked in. I know I said something similar in the last video. Their team overall were amazing, but this is the nursing team individuals, so the nurses, the HCAs and the TNAs and RNAs were the best that I'd ever worked with. I could ask anyone to help me with anything and it was like no issue at all, and I absolutely loved working there. So I 100% would go back, and as soon as everything is back to normal, I will definitely pick up shifts on there when they show up on an HSP. Okay, so that's all for this week's video, guys. Thank you so much for all of the feedback that I've got about this series, and I hope you've enjoyed hearing about my placement experiences. If you like this video where I talked about orthopaedics, please give it a thumbs up down below and hit the subscribe button so you can see some more of my videos, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss a single one of those when they come out. I will see you soon for another video. Bye!